She pulled him into the kitchen to hide, then realized he was the Mafia boss. The rain did not just fall on Port Armitage, it assaulted it. A violent horizontal deluge swept in from the Gulf, rattling the grand windows of the Azure Tidelight Hotel. Inside, the storm was one of champagne and forced smiles. The city's elite had gathered for a hurricane relief fundraiser, a lavish affair designed to polish consciences and secure contracts under the guise of charity. Far below the ballroom's golden light, in the stainless steel heart of the building, a different kind of storm raged. This one smelled of searing scallops and burnt lemon peel. Talia Mercer, guest chef for the night, moved through the chaos with a conductor's precision. The rhythmic shing of her knife on the honing rod, the sharp, percussive hiss of pans hitting the gas, the roar of the ventilation hoods, this was her symphony. She plated a delicate tower of crab and avocado, wiping a stray smudge of saffron aioli from the porcelain rim. Her kitchen, her rules, even when it was borrowed. She noticed them halfway through the second seating, just as the main courses were flying. 3 men, suits too stiff, shoes too practical for a gala. They did not belong. They passed the kitchen's open pass, their eyes scanning not the food, but the layout, the exits, the staff. They weren't hotel security, and they certainly weren't lost guests. Talia had worked in rough kitchens in worse neighborhoods. She recognized the predatory stillness of men who were paid to watch. They were patrolling. A new figure slipped into the back service corridor, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness. He moved with a fluid grace the other men lacked, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that seemed to drink the harsh fluorescent light. He paused by the ice machine, checking his phone. The light caught a glint of metal on his dark tie. It was not a clip, it was a pin. Small and intricately carved, a single, perfect branch of red coral. It was strange. Almost artistic. It felt like a signal. The man looked up, his gaze sweeping the kitchen, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes met Talia's. They were flat, unreadable. Before the moment could settle, the main kitchen doors burst open, slamming against the rubber stoppers. A team of men swarmed in. They wore tactical vests over dark windbreakers, but there were no insignias, no police markings. Their leader, a man with a bulldog face, barked. Routine fire safety check. We need to inspect all exits and utility closets. The kitchen's rhythm shattered, pans clattered, voices stopped. A fire safety check at 9:30 p.m. during the biggest charity event of the year. Talia's street-honed instinct screamed, this was wrong, this was a lie. The way they moved, fanning out, flanking the exits, hands hovering near their hips, this was not the posture of inspectors. It was the measured, coordinated tread of hunters closing a trap. Her eyes shot to the service corridor. The man with the coral pin was still there, 10 feet away. He had not moved, but his stillness had changed. He was assessing, his head slightly tilted, listening to the men in the kitchen. One of the tactical men spotted him. Sir, hold right there. The man in the suit did not hold. He turned, not to run, but to walk deeper into the staff-only labyrinth. Talia did not think, she acted. She lunged from her station, grabbing the man's arm as he passed the alcove for the walk-in freezer. The wool of his suit was fine spun and damp with the night's rain. He was solid muscle beneath the fabric. He turned on her, surprise flashing in his eyes, but she used his momentum, yanking him off balance. What the hell? Shut up, she hissed, shoving the heavy, insulated door open. She bundled him inside, into the frigid dark. The door hissed shut behind them, the heavy latch clicking with a dreadful, echoing finality. The world vanished. The roar of the kitchen was instantly muffled, replaced by the low, electric hum of the freezer's compressor. The blast of cold air was immediate, stealing their breath. It smelled sharply of frozen licorice root, dry herbs, and butchered meat, and underneath it all, the scent of the man she had trapped expensive cologne that spoke of wood smoke and something dark, like damp earth. They were 2 feet apart in the narrow space, plunged into near blackness, their breath plumed between them, white and ghostly in the single safety light above the door. Talia's back was pressed against a wire rack of frozen scallops, the man her prisoner, or her protector. She did not know which stood facing the door. He had not touched her. His hand came up, palm pressing flat against the vibrating steel of the door as if testing its strength. His body was a wall between her and the outside world, a solid, breathing shield. He was utterly still, but it was the stillness of a panther, coiled and ready to explode. They listened. Heavy bootsteps crunched on the tile just outside, shouts. He was right here. Check the dry storage. Check the loading bay. The sounds were frantic, angry. The boots pounded away, fading down the corridor. The silence that returned was heavier, more dangerous than the noise had been. Talia let out the breath she had been holding. The man did not move. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice rough. He turned his head slowly. The dim safety light caught the planes of his face, casting harsh shadows. She finally, truly, looked at him. His eyes met hers. They were not panicked. They were not grateful. They were a flat, terrifyingly calm silver gray. Her gaze dropped to his left hand, which was now resting on the door's emergency release bar. A signet ring, heavy, gold, and deeply etched. It was not a family crest. It was the twin serpent emblem of the Veil. Talia's stomach did not drop. Her blood did not run cold. It ignited. She knew that symbol. Everyone in Port Armitage who worked the docks, the restaurants, or the unions knew that symbol. It was the mark of the velvet current, the invisible hand that held the city's shipping, its politics, and its underworld in an unbreakable grip. He spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the cold air. Lorenzo Vitali. He did not offer the name as a thank you. He offered it as a fact, an inevitability. Talia Mercer stared at the most powerful and most dangerous man in the city. She understood. She had not just saved a man from a fire inspection. She had hidden the city's apex predator from a rival pack. She had pulled the shark from the water and locked herself in the tank with him. She did not shrink. She did not gasp. She crossed her arms, the thick cotton of her chef's white stiff with starch and cold. Her voice was steady, sharp as her best knife. "Who was hunting you?" A flicker of something not surprise, but respect passed through those silver gray eyes. A thin, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth, a razor's edge in the dim light. Before he could answer, a new sound bled through the insulated walls. It started low, then grew, a multi-layered wail from every direction, not boots, sirens, dozens of them, converging on the azure tidelight. A distorted voice crackled over a bullhorn from the street below. "OCST Office of Coastal Security and Trade. The building is surrounded. No one leaves." Lorenzo Vitali looked at the door, then back at Talia. The faint smile was gone. The fundraiser had not just been interrupted. The party had become a hunting ground. Lorenzo hit the internal release bar before the sound of the sirens could penetrate the insulated steel. The freezer door swung open, spilling them back into the humid chaos of the kitchen. A sudden, violent return to the world. The air was thick with the smell of citrus and fear. "The sirens are OCST," he said, his voice flat. He was already moving. "They aren't here for a fire inspection." Talia did not need to be told. She grabbed her knife roll from the prep station and plunged past the gleaming convection ovens, heading not for the loading bay, the obvious exit, but for the deep scullery. Lorenzo followed, a dark gray shadow adhering to her steps. She slammed her palm against a rusted keypad hidden by a fire suppression chart, a system so old the hotel management had likely forgotten it. A narrow, grease-slick door hissed open, revealing a shaft roaring with the sound of massive fans. Steam pipes and service ducts she threw over her shoulder, descending into the hot, mechanical darkness, the hotel's guts. He followed without hesitation, down iron rungs and onto a narrow catwalk suspended over the building's thrumming machinery. The air was oppressive, smelling of hot metal, ozone and mildew. Talia moved with a confidence born of long shifts and a need to know every exit, her feet finding purchase on the slick grating. She knew which pipes to avoid, the ones that hissed with scalding steam. Lorenzo moved behind her, his silence an active, assessing thing. He was cataloging her skills, impressed by a map only learned by someone who had lived and worked in the margins. The tunnel spat them out into a concrete alleyway, 3 blocks south of the azure tidelight. The rain was a cold, driving sheet. The night was fractured by the rhythmic sweep of blue and red lights painting the wet brickwork. Unmarked black SUVs, the kind that screamed federal overreach, were parked at angles, blocking intersections. The OCST had established a hard perimeter. Talia ignored them, her chef's whites already plastered to her. She led him to a battered white refrigerated box truck parked behind a stack of empty kegs. The faded logo read Salt and Sable, her restaurant. She fished a key from her pocket, unlocked the passenger side, and jerked her head. "Get in." She ran around to the driver's side, climbed in, and jammed the key into the ignition. The diesel engine protested, then turned over with a low, rattling growl. She pulled the truck into the confused traffic, just another vendor fleeing the lockdown. The thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers was the only sound for several blocks, a frantic metronome against the rising tension in the cab. Why Lorenzo finally asked, he was not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the side mirror, watching the chaos recede. "They weren't inspectors," Talia said, her eyes on the road. "That is not what I asked. You did not know who they were, but you knew what they were. You did not know me. Why help?" Talia's knuckles, wrapped around the wheel, were bone white. A brief, unwanted memory flashed different uniforms, a different door, a long time ago. "I do not like hunters," she said, her voice tight and low, especially not the kind who wrap themselves in the law to do it. She reached into her coat, pulling out a squat black radio she had snatched from the scullery wall. She thumbed the volume down, and a frantic voice crackled through the static. "All assets are compromised. OCST is citing Operation Undertow. I repeat, Operation Undertow is active. All partners are considered hostile." Lorenzo's head snapped toward the radio. His stillness became absolute, his profile hardening into granite. He pulled out his own phone and dialed a single number. It was answered before the first ring finished. "Orion," Lorenzo's voice was quiet, yet it filled the cab with absolute authority. "Undertow is live. It is a full sweep. They were waiting. Order no resistance. Scatter the assets, lock the wallets, all of them." He paused, listening to the tiny voice on the other end. The hotel was the bait. "I am clear." He glanced at Talia, a quick, calculating look. "Send Mara Leto to Salt and Sable. Now, protect the oven. I do not care how—" He hung up. Protect the oven? He meant her kitchen, her life. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked down Talia's spine. "That pin," she said suddenly, needing to break the silence. "The coral pin on your tie." His hand instinctively went to his chest, a signal. For trusted partners, for tonight's meeting. One of the men who came into the kitchen before the raid, the suits. Not the tactical team was wearing one, Talia said, making the turn onto the waterfront access road. It was identical. Lorenzo stared at her, the implications settling. The trap was not just outside, it was inside his own organization. Someone had copied the signal. Someone had betrayed him. A high-pitched electronic whine suddenly became audible over the rain and the truck's engine. "What is that?" Talia asked. Lorenzo was already scanning the sky. Drone, civilian model, modified. He pointed out the passenger window. There, 2 o'clock high. A small, dark shape with a single pulsing red light hovered above the warehouses, pacing them, matching their speed. "They are tracking the truck," he stated. "They will lock down the bridges," Talia said, her mind racing. "Turn here," Lorenzo ordered, pointing to a rusted chain-link gate sagging on its hinges. "Port Armitage shipwrights. Condemned." Talia did not question him. She spun the wheel, the truck's tires screaming on the wet asphalt, and crashed through the flimsy barrier. They barreled into a graveyard of maritime skeletons, the half-built hulls of dead ships looming like whale ribs. "We must blind it," Lorenzo said. "Stop by that steam conduit." He indicated a large, insulated pipe running between two derelict buildings, a pressure valve near its base visibly hissing. Talia slammed the brakes. "Keep the engine running." Before she could speak, he was out of the cab and into the downpour. He grabbed a heavy, discarded wrench from a pile of scrap, scaled the low scaffolding, and locked the tool onto the valve. With a single, brutal grunt of effort, he twisted it. A massive plume of pressurized steam erupted from the pipe with a deafening roar, shooting 30 feet into the dark sky. The thick white cloud instantly enveloped the drone. The red light vanished. Lorenzo slid back into the cab, soaked to the skin, his face impassive. "It is blind. It will either overheat or lose the signal. Go, the back exit." As they rumbled toward the far side of the shipyard, Talia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent, vibrating against her hip. She pulled it out, her stomach clenching. A text message from an unknown number. It was a single photograph, her younger brother, Jude, walking out of his university dormitory, headphones on, a textbook under his arm. He looked young, safe, oblivious. The photo was sharp, taken from across the street. It was time-stamped 2 minutes ago. They were not just hunting Lorenzo. They had already found her. "What is it?" Lorenzo asked, sensing the sudden, cold dread that filled the cab. She wordlessly showed him the screen. His expression did not change, but his eyes went flat and cold. "My brother," she whispered. "Jude," Lorenzo said. It was not a question. He knew. "Orion can have him in a Vale safe zone within 20 minutes. He will be protected." "No," Talia said, a raw, protective reflex. "I will not have him dragged into your world." "Talia," Lorenzo said, his voice quiet but absolute, turning to look at her fully. "Look at the picture. He is already in it." The floor had just vanished from beneath her. She was sliding, and there was nothing to hold on to. She jammed her foot on the accelerator, racing for the shelter of the Port Armitage suspension bridge. As the truck climbed the steep incline of the bridge ramp, the engine sputtered. It coughed once, choked, and then died. Talia turned the key, frantic. Nothing. The electronics were live, but the engine was dead. The truck rolled to a heavy, silent stop on the bridge's exposed causeway. "It is not the battery," she said, her voice hollow. Lorenzo was already leaning down, scanning the wiring under the dashboard. "It is a kill switch," Talia breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. A remote one. Someone wired this truck to die. She stared at the dead ignition, the implications stacking up, one on top of the other. To install a switch like that, someone needed time, access, privacy. Someone from the hotel, Lorenzo asked, his hand finding a small, unfamiliar black box zip-tied to the steering column. Talia shook her head, the dread turning to ice. "No, they would have needed access to my restaurant, Salt and Sable. Someone was inside my kitchen long before tonight." The dead truck was a 2-ton coffin on the most exposed point in the city. The wind howled, rocking the chassis. Below them, the dark, churning water of the harbor. Behind them, the swarm of blue and red lights. Lorenzo did not panic. He tore the kick panel off from under the steering column and ripped the black box out with a sharp twist of his wrist, wires sparking. "They know we stopped," he grated, "but they do not know we left." He shoved his door open. "Come on, we go low." Talia followed, grabbing her knife roll. They vaulted the low guardrail, descending into the bridge's steel underbelly, a dripping, rusted world of iron crossbeams and maintenance ladders. They moved quickly, dropping from the causeway onto the slick, moss-covered pilings of the old wharf. He led the way to a dilapidated wooden shed, its door hanging by one hinge, a place for storing nets and crab pots. Long abandoned, Lorenzo slipped inside, pulling her in after him, and eased the door closed. The relative silence was instant. broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the tin roof and the groan of the old pier pilings shifting in the tide. The air was thick with the smells of damp wood, tar, and long-dead fish. Lorenzo leaned against the far wall, a shadow among shadows, his breathing finally audible, deep and controlled. Talia leaned against a stack of nets, her own breath stinging her lungs. "You are bleeding," she said. His voice was neutral. I ripped out the switch. "Stay there." She fumbled through the darkness, her hands brushing against old tools, ropes and glass floats until they found what they were looking for, a metal box, rusted at the seams, a fisherman's first aid kit. She clicked on her phone's flashlight, keeping the beam pointed at the floor, and crossed the small space. "Give me your hand." He hesitated. For a man who had faced down tactical teams and fled across rooftops, this simple request seemed to give him pause. He extended his left hand, the one with the veil signet ring. She took it. His skin was cold from the rain, his palm hard and calloused. The gash across his knuckles was deep, welling dark blood. The flashlight beam illuminated the stark, shocking red against the fine, charcoal-gray wool of his suit sleeve. The sight was too intimate, the color too bright in their dark, shared space. It made her stomach tighten. Talia opened the kit, pulling out antiseptic wipes and a roll of gauze. The proximity was suffocating. To work, she had to stand close, her hip brushing his, their shoulders almost touching. She could feel the solid warmth of his body through his damp, expensive suit. She wiped the cut clean, the sharp, minty smell of the antiseptic cut through the odor of the shed. Lorenzo was watching her face, not his hand. The arrogant, controlled mask she had seen in the corridor was gone. In the low, reflected light, his silver-gray eyes held a raw, unguarded attention. He was assessing her again, but in a different way. Not as a tool, but as a person. Talia broke the silence, her voice rapid, clinical. "Anything to fill the space. The harbor is locked down. The OCST will have the main channels, the bridge and the tunnel. But they do not know the cold chain routes." He listened, his gaze unwavering. "The refrigerated containers," she continued, her fingers working fast, wrapping the gauze. "They run on independent grids. They leave the port on automated trucks. The manifests are locked 24 hours out. If we can get to the K-Line terminal, I know the schedules, I know the blind spots, the routes they use to avoid traffic." Lorenzo remained silent, absorbing the information. He respected the intel. He respected her intel. She was not just a chef, she was a logistics expert, a creature of the same docks he ruled. She secured the bandage, her fingers pressing against his skin to fix the tape. As her thumb brushed the sensitive skin near the wound, his entire shoulder tensed. It was a small, involuntary flinch, instantly suppressed, but she felt it. The invincible man was not made of stone. A quiet moment stretched, filled only by the rain on the roof. He spoke, his voice so low she barely heard it. He was testing her. "If I am the man they say I am, the man who runs the shadows in this city, why are you still here? Why are you touching me?" Talia paused, her hands still resting on his. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. The static in the air was so thick she could almost taste it. "Because you are shaking," she said, her voice just as quiet. "It is subtle. You hide it better than anyone I have ever met. But you are shaking." Their eyes locked. The challenge, the truth, the raw vulnerability of the admission hung between them. The world compressed to the few inches separating their faces. She saw a storm in his eyes, a conflict he wrestled into submission. Then, slowly, Lorenzo broke the gaze. He took half a step back, pulling his hand from her grasp. It was a conscious, deliberate retreat. He was choosing restraint. Talia let out a breath she did not know she was holding. A tight, humorless smile touched her lips. "Do not mistake this for me being soft, Vitali. I cook with high heat." Lorenzo looked at his bandaged hand, then back at her. The shadows had reclaimed his face, but she heard the soft whisper of his reply. He said learned a long time ago not to get burned. He straightened, the moment broken, the hierarchy resetting itself. The picture of your brother. Jude, it was a message. They know you are the key. Talia's brief flicker of control vanished, replaced by the cold fear from the truck. What do you want? The man with the fake coral pin? The one who set the trap? The one who wired your truck? He's in my organization, and he is using your restaurant. He is the one who sent that picture. He's trying to burn me, and he is using you as the kindling. He stepped toward her, not with intimacy, but with the intensity of a negotiator closing a deal. Help me find him, Lorenzo said. Help me find the traitor who has been inside your walls. And if I do, Talia asked, her voice hard. I will have your brother moved, not to a safe house, out of the state. He will be enrolled in a new term, at a better school, under a full academic scholarship that cannot be traced. By sunrise, he will be safe. I will give you my word. Talia looked at the man who was the source of her danger and, suddenly, her only solution, a deal with the devil to save an angel. By sunrise, she confirmed. By sunrise, he promised. They stared at each other, the bargain sealed. Outside, the water was rising. The groaning of the pier grew louder as the tide pushed in, the lapping of the waves sounding like a clock counting down the remaining hours of the night. They left the shed, melting back into the rain-swept darkness of the docks. They were temporary allies, their boundaries clearly defined, but the static electricity that lingered between them, the memory of that shared breath in the dark, told a different story. They moved through the back alleys of the wharf, shadows using shadows. The rain had softened to a clinging, ice-cold mist. Salt and Sable was dark, its rustic wooden sign creaking in the wind. Talia unlocked the heavy oak back door, the kitchen entrance, and pushed it open. A woman was already standing inside. She was leaning against the stainless steel pass, bathed in the dim red glow of the in-service light above the door. She was tall, with a severe black coat and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her stillness was absolute. Lorenzo's team. Orion said you were compromised. He did not say you were taken, the woman said, her voice a low contralto. Her hand was visibly resting on the grip of a pistol holstered at her hip. Lorenzo stepped into the doorway, moving slightly in front of Talia. Stand down, Mara. She is not a threat. She is an asset. The woman, Mara Leto, did not relax. Her eyes, dark and analytical, raked over Talia. She brought you here, to her place of business, the first place they would look. It is the only place they would not, Talia countered, her voice sharp. She stepped past Lorenzo, brushing his arm, and into her kitchen, her space. The power dynamics shifted instantly. They wired my truck, which means they have been here. They think it is compromised. They would never expect me to run back to the source of the leak. Mara's eyes narrowed, registering the logic. She looked around the dark kitchen, the hanging copper pots, the meticulously clean prep surfaces, the massive 8-burner gas range that was the restaurant's heart. A fortress, Mara observed, her tone holding a fraction of new respect. Or a tomb. Turn on the lights, Talia, Lorenzo ordered, his voice soft. No, Talia said. If they are watching, they will see the light. We work in the dark. She moved with confidence through the familiar blackness, her hands finding landmarks. She stopped at the ancient industrial-sized floor mixer in the corner, a beast of cast iron and steel used for kneading massive batches of dough. She knelt, her fingers finding a loose bolt near the base. She turned it, and a small panel clicked open. Mara Leto took a step forward, her hand moving from her weapon. Lorenzo put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Talia reached inside the machine's guts and pulled out a small, metal box. It was a simple biscuit tin, sealed with electrical tape. Inside was a single, high-capacity hard drive. She walked to her small office, barely a closet, and plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen cast a pale blue glow on their faces. You have been busy, Lorenzo stated, looking at the screen. It was not a question. The screen was filled with files, spreadsheets, shipping manifests, scanned invoices. "I am a chef," Talia said, her voice tight, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "My margins are based on the cost of goods. 6 months ago, my seafood costs went up by 30%, then 50%. She pulled up an invoice. "This is a ghost bill from a distributor I have never used for a container of scallops that never existed. It was embedded in my legitimate freight forwarding bill. Someone was padding the invoices, testing the system." "You were being skimmed," Mara said, unimpressed. "I was being bled," Talia corrected. "I started tracking the container numbers they were faking. I pulled the public manifests from the Port Authority. I cross-referenced the timelines. The numbers they were using were not random. They were real containers. But the cargo was always listed as medical supplies or agricultural machinery. Empty, untaxed, moving through the port at odd hours." She clicked a file, and a complex web of connections appeared, a flowchart she had built herself. The billing all routes back to the same shell corporation. She said, "A charity." Lorenzo leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. He knew the name, the Harbor Light Trust, which, Talia said, her voice growing colder, is chaired by Mayor Elliot Granger, and its largest donor is the Tri-County Racketeering Commission. A heavy silence filled the office. Mara Leto let out a low, slow whistle. "TCRC," Lorenzo said, the name tasting like acid, "the commission created by the mayor to fight me, to fight the velvet current." He understood, in a sickening, clarifying rush, the betrayal was elegant. His own organization was the perfect boogeyman, while the TCRC publicly hunted Lorenzo Vitali. They were using their authority to provide cover for their own smuggling operation. The traitor in his organization had not just been feeding them information. He had been using Lorenzo's network as a shield, making sure the velvet current took the blame if anything went wrong. The Harbor Light Trust was the laundry, the TCRC was the muscle, and the mayor was the face. They were drilling holes in the same boat both he and Talia were in. As if summoned by the thought, Talia's phone lit up on the desk. Another text, another photo of Jude. This time, he was standing at a bus stop. The EXIF data was embedded, and below it, a set of coordinates. "Dryline Pier," Talia read, her voice hollow. "Shed 7. It was not a threat, it was a summons, an open challenge. Lorenzo's phone rang. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Orion?" "They are pulling out," Orion's voice crackled, urgent and confused. "The OCST, they are packing up. The entire perimeter at the Azure Tidelight is collapsing. They are just leaving." This was wrong. A full-scale federal raid did not just pack up and go home. "They are clearing the stage," Lorenzo said, his mind racing. "They are leaving the field open for the cleanup crew, for the third party." He meant the traitor, and whoever he was working with. "Dryline Pier," Orion said. "It is a black span-held dock. Mercs, the ones who work for Harbor Light." "A direct attack," Mara said, her hand moving back to her weapon. "We hit them now, hard." "No," Lorenzo said, his decision absolute. He looked at Talia. "A war in the street is what they want. It is loud, it is messy. It makes me the villain. We expose the traitor. We use their evidence against them." Orion was protesting on the phone, but Lorenzo was not listening. He was looking at Talia's screen, at the map of the port she had pulled up. He and Talia saw it at the same time. "They are sharing resources," Lorenzo said, pointing. "They are using your own people." "No, they are sharing routes," Talia breathed, zooming in. "My shipping data, the routes that the Harbor Light Trust is using, they all converge on one terminal, a terminal that does not exist on any official port map." She clicked a layer, and a new set of data appeared, a dotted line, running from the Deepwater Channel directly to Dryline Pier, bypassing customs, bypassing inspections. It was labeled Freezer 11. "Cold storage," Talia whispered, the words catching in her throat. "That is what my supplier always complained about, a lack of cold chain integrity." "It is not for seafood," Lorenzo said, his voice grim. He knew what moved in the dark, refrigerated containers that never saw the light of day. People, contraband, the kind of cargo that needed to be kept on ice in more ways than one. Freezer 11 was not a shipping line. It was a secret, refrigerated highway into the heart of his city. And the traitor had just invited them to see it. The mist clinging to Dryline Pier was thick as bone marrow, a shroud of icy salt that deadened sound. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Under the harsh glare of temporary floodlights, a hurricane relief banner sagged, flapping wetly against a chain-link fence. Men in bright orange vests, the black span mercenaries, were loading pallets from a forklift into a waiting container. But the pallets were not MREs or bottled water. They were long, wooden crates, stenciled with medical insignia that looked too new, a perfect cover for shipping anything. Talia and Lorenzo moved along the shadowed side of a warehouse, just outside the light's reach. They were dressed in borrowed dockworker gear, heavy, oil-stained overalls and wool caps pulled low. The disguise felt flimsy, a paper-thin defense against the cold and the armed men just 50 yards away. Talia tugged her cap lower, the rough wool scratching her forehead. Lorenzo, moving beside her, reached out and adjusted the collar of her overalls, pulling it higher to cover the last visible sliver of her white chef's jacket. It was a practical, impersonal gesture, but his gloved fingers brushed the skin of her neck, and a jolt of heat, sharp and unwelcome, shot through her. He paused, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second before pulling away. They crouched behind a rusted bollard, and they saw him. Jude. He was standing near the container, separate from the workers, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He was not tied, but he was guarded. 2 blackspan mercs flanked him, their posture casual but their weapons unslung. Standing near the forklift, directing the operation, was a man in a crisp suit that looked absurdly out of place. He turned, and the floodlights caught the glint of metal on his tie. The fake coral pin. "That is him," Talia whispered, her voice catching. "The one in the suit," Lorenzo confirmed, his voice a low growl. "Jude is the bait. They are waiting for us." Orion Lorenzo spoke into a small comms device in his cuff. "In position, North Tower. I see the Overwatch." Orion's voice crackled back. "Mara? 200 yards out, on the water. I have the exit," Mara's voice replied. "Calm as the deep." "Take the shot, Orion," Lorenzo ordered. The dock was suddenly plunged into near-total darkness. The pop-pop-pop of the floodlights exploding was simultaneous with the high-velocity crack of Orion's rifle from the distant tower. One of the mercs guarding Jude crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted, shouts. The remaining mercs fumbled for flashlights, their training fighting their surprise. "Now, Talia," Lorenzo yelled. Talia ran, not toward Jude, but toward the side of the shed. She grabbed the heavy, red fire extinguisher from its bracket. She did not try to aim it. She slammed the canister against the concrete piling, breaking the nozzle, and threw it. A massive, pressurized cloud of white CO2 erupted, a ghost storm that instantly enveloped the area where Jude stood. It was a complete visual whiteout. "Jude down," Talia screamed. Lorenzo was already moving, a gray phantom in the swirling white mist. He burst through the cloud, grabbing a shocked and disoriented Jude. The remaining mercenary, blinded and choking, spun and fired his weapon wildly. Lorenzo shoved Jude to the ground and turned, taking the full, brutal impact of the mercenary's rifle butt to his ribs. The sound was a wet, sickening thud. Lorenzo staggered but did not fall. He disarmed the man with a series of short, precise, savage strikes. The man went down and did not get up. "Go, go!" Lorenzo snarled, pushing Jude toward the shadows. They sprinted, a 3-person team, diving behind a tall stack of refrigerated containers, just as the emergency lights on the pier flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow. "Mara!" Lorenzo grunted into his comms, leaning heavily against the corrugated steel. "We have the package. We are moving to you." Talia's back was pressed to the metal wall. Her brother was safe, crouched beside her, but her body had not gotten the message. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline drain hitting her with the force of a physical blow. The cold was unbearable, a living thing inside her bones. "Jude, stay here," Lorenzo commanded, his voice tight with pain. He turned to Talia. In the yellow light, he saw the tremor rattling her. It was not just fear, it was shock. He reached out, not for her face, not for her shoulders, but for her hand. He covered her shaking, work-roughened knuckles with his gloved one. His touch was firm, grounding, a solid anchor in the spinning chaos. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She could only nod, her teeth chattering. He moved closer, shielding her from the wind, his body a solid wall of warmth and damp wool. The proximity that had been electric was now essential. She looked up at him. His face was just inches away, streaked with rain and grit. She saw the pain he was hiding, the faint grimace as he breathed. She saw the silver-gray eyes that were not cold, but fiercely, intensely alive. "You are hurt," she whispered. "I'm fine," and he lied. And then, neither of them moved. The space between them collapsed, filled with the roar of their own blood, the shared adrenaline, the impossible, terrifying relief. He leaned in, slowly, giving her an eternity to pull away. She did not. Talia met him halfway. The kiss was not soft, it was a collision. It was desperate and immediate, born of cold and fear, and a sudden shared spark of survival. His lips were chapped from the wind, tasting of salt and the metallic tang of the air. His ungloved hand came up, the one she had bandaged, and cupped the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her damp hair. He was not gentle, but he was not rough. He was sure. Talia's hands gripped the front of his overalls, pulling him closer, as if she could absorb his strength, his heat, her fear, his pain, their impossible situation. It all melted, focusing into this one singular point of contact, their heartbeats hammered against each other, a frantic, shared rhythm. He shifted, his body pressing her against the cold steel wall, and her breath hitched, her mouth opening under his. It was a kiss that promised nothing and demanded everything. A deep, deafening ship's horn blasted from the harbor, a sound that vibrated through the metal they leaned on. They broke apart, both breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. They stared, wide-eyed, in the dim light, the reality of what they had just done settling. A small, breathless laugh escaped Talia. Lorenzo smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit his eyes. "After this is done," he whispered, his voice thick. Talia nodded, a silent, binding promise. She pressed her forehead to his for 1/2 second longer. Then, she was all business again, turning to her brother. "Let's go," she said. They moved toward the water's edge, where Mara's low-slung boat was already nosing against the pilings. As they slipped away, Talia looked back. On the crate where the man with the fake pin had been standing, a small, black object sat, reflecting the yellow light. It had been left for them. "A memory card," Lorenzo said, already knowing. "The traitor is not just running, he is talking." The maze was getting deeper. The attic apartment above Salt and Sable was Talia's real kitchen, the small, cramped space where she tested her recipes and lived her life. It smelled of dried oregano, sea salt, and old wood. Within an hour, it had been converted into a Vale tactical station. Mara Leto stood sentinel at the single doorway, a ghost in the shadows. Orion Cade, having arrived minutes after them, had patched Lorenzo's ribs and was now a quiet, efficient presence at the window, monitoring the street. Jude, grown into a young man with his sister's quick eyes, sat at the small kitchen table, his laptop open. He was pale but vibrating with a nervous energy, his gaze shifting between his sister and the man she had brought into their sanctuary. He was protective, but underneath it, awestruck. The atmosphere was thick, strung tight as a wire. Talia needed to reclaim her space. She moved to the small stove, pulling a bag of mussels from the fridge, garlic, a bottle of white wine. Her hands, needing a familiar task, began to work, the rhythmic chop of her knife the only sound. Lorenzo, stripped of his heavy, soaked overalls, leaned against the counter near the kettle. He wore the damp slacks of his ruined suit and a thin, dark T-shirt Jude had provided, which stretched taut across his shoulders and the fresh bandages on his ribs. He was making tea, steeping the leaves in a glass pot until the water was almost black. The steam from her mussels, savory with garlic and wine, mingled with the sharp, bitter aroma of his tea, two opposing rituals, sharing the same small, warm space. "He's safe, for now," Lorenzo said, his voice low, breaking the silence. He was watching Jude, but they know him. They know this place. Talia did not look up from the stove, so we negotiate the terms. "The goal is the same," Lorenzo said, accepting the shift. "We expose the traitor and the Harbor Light Trust. We use the memory card." "We use it at the TCRC hearings," Talia countered. "The ones the mayor set up to destroy you. It is the only stage big enough." "They are corrupt," Orion interjected from the window. "They will bury the evidence." "Not if the public sees it first," Talia said. She turned, the wooden spoon in her hand. "My terms. Jude is protected. He walks away from this completely, and your world never touches him again." "Agreed," Lorenzo said. "My restaurant, Salt and Sable, when this is over, you are gone. Your organization, your influence, it stays out of my kitchen for good." Lorenzo's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Agreed." "And one more," she said, stepping closer. "No more lies. You tell me the truth. About Harbor Light, about Freezer 11, about everything." He held her gaze. "I accept, but I have a rule of my own." "Which is?" "You do not risk yourself alone. No more running into dark tunnels. No more disappearing into steam clouds. No more kitchen heroics. Where you go, I go. We are tethered until this is done." "Fine," Talia said. "Temporary." "Temporary," he confirmed. He offered his hand. She met it. His grip was firm, sealing the contract, but his thumb brushed the sensitive skin of her wrist, a deliberate, possessive stroke before he let her go, leaving a trail of heat. Jude was absorbed in the laptop, muttering about firewalls. Mara was outside the door. Orion was focused on the street. The kitchen, for a moment, belonged only to them. Talia turned back to her simmering pot. Lorenzo moved to stand beside her. So close their shoulders brushed, the heat from the stove wrapped around them. "That was a promise," he said, not referring to the handshake. He was referring to the kiss on the pier. "That was adrenaline," she replied, stirring the muscles. "Was it?" She turned to face him, her back pressing against the warm edge of the stove. He was close. Close enough for her to see the exhaustion bruising the skin under his eyes and the pain he held tightly in his ribs. "We have an agreement, Vitali, boundaries." "I know." His voice was rough. He did not move, but his eyes dropped to her mouth. This time, it was not frantic. It was not a desperate collision in the dark. It was slow, and it was intentional. Talia set the spoon down. She raised her hands, not to pull him in, but to rest them on his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palms. She rose onto her toes, and she kissed him. He did not grab her. He did not possess. He responded. His hands came up to rest on her waist, his touch surprisingly gentle, holding her as if she were something fragile. He let her set the pace. It was a kiss of questions, of testing. When she deepened it, his control fractured. A low sound vibrated in his chest, and his grip tightened, pulling her flush against him. His back hit the kitchen counter. His mouth was warm, tasting of black tea and the salt that still clung to his skin. Her fingers tangled, lacing behind his neck, and she felt the sharp, sudden intake of his breath as she pressed herself closer. He was a man made of coiled steel and ironclad restraint, and she felt that restraint warring with a desperate, buried hunger. They stayed there, lost in the scent of oregano and steam, their breath mingling. Hearts hammering, it was a promise of a fire, held carefully in check. They broke apart, but did not move away. Both were breathing fast. A small, shaky laugh escaped her. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. He was still shaking, but she knew it was not from the cold. "Boundaries," he whispered, his voice thick. "We should keep them," she whispered back. They both knew they already had not. The intimacy of the moment shifted, hardening into something else: trust. Lorenzo stepped back, finally, putting a foot of air between them. He turned to look out the small, fogged window. "You asked for the truth," he said, his voice flat. "You need to know why I control the port, why I built the current." Talia waited, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I had a sister, Alara, 15 years ago. When I was just starting, she vanished. She was 19. He spoke to the glass, to the dark city beyond. She was involved with the wrong crew. They promised her a new life, passage on a ship, but she was not cargo. She was contraband. They put her on a cold chain route to keep her quiet. Freezer 11, I tore the city apart looking for her. I never found her. I built my entire organization to find the men who ran that line. I took control of the docks so that secret, frozen highway could never be used again." Talia felt the blood drain from her face. The spoon clattered from her numb fingers onto the floor. "What did you say?" "Freezer 11, Lorenzo repeated, turning to look at her. Talia walked past him, her movements stiff, robotic. She went to a small, cluttered desk in the corner. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger, her mother's ledger. She opened it and handed it to him. "My mother," Talia said, her voice a hollow echo. "She was a stockkeeper at the K-Line terminal. She disappeared 10 years ago. They said she ran, or fell. They never found a body." Lorenzo looked at the pages. They were filled with meticulous, handwritten notes, shipping manifests, times, container numbers, and annotations, written in the margins: Harbor Light trust shipment, no inspection, bypassed weigh-in, Freezer 11. Their pasts, their ghosts, their driving obsessions, they were not just parallel. They were intertwined, locked together in the same dark, cold place. "I am in," Jude suddenly announced from the table. The sharp sound broke the spell. "The card, it is a single video file, high angle. Looks like a hidden office cam." The file opened. The image was grainy, time-stamped from 3 days ago. They saw the man with the fake coral pin, and they saw the man he was meeting with Lyle Holland, the decorated director of the OCST, the public face of the city's law and order. The video was silent, but the actions were clear. The man from Harbor Light slid a thick, bank-sealed envelope across the desk. Director Holland took it, opened it, glanced inside, and slid it into his desk drawer. Jude exhaled. They bought a federal director. "They did not just buy him," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly calm. "They are partners." "This is it," Talia said, her mind racing, pushing the grief down, letting the cold fury take its place. "This is the proof." She looked at Lorenzo, their shared history now a weapon. "We cannot just leak this. They will discredit it. Holland will call it a deep fake, propaganda from your organization. They will spin it." She slammed the laptop shut. "We have to choose the stage, not just a public one. We need one they cannot run from. A stage they built themselves. The stage they chose was the Port Armitage annual Fishermen's Parade. It was the city's pulse, a chaotic, vibrant celebration of the very docks they intended to cleanse. The parade route would be packed with thousands of people. Local news crews would be broadcasting live, their feeds piped directly to the massive screens set up at the parade's endpoint, the TCRC Civic Plaza, exactly where Director Holland would be giving a self-congratulatory speech on maritime security. The plan was a 3-layered assault, a symphony of misdirection and technology. Layer 1, the signal. Talia and Jude would hijack the live broadcast feed. Layer 2, the cavalry. Mara would guide a clean faction of the OCST, one Orion insisted still existed to the real Freezer 11, precisely when Holland was publicly implicated. Layer 3, the checkmate. Lorenzo would ensure Director Holland was not just present, but arrogant, exposed, and ready to be sacrificed by his own partners. The first piece was the insider. Orion Cade, using contacts from a life Lorenzo had left behind, made a quiet approach, not to a cop, but to an auditor. Sable Wren was 26, brilliant, and tired of her TCRC superiors telling her which numbers to ignore. She worked in the commission's basement, unseen, and she saw everything. They used the Harbor Light Trust as a pass-through, Sable told Orion, meeting him in the stacks of the city's public library. They code the transfers as seized asset liquidation. They are not just taking bribes, they are funding Blackspan with taxpayer money. She agreed to help. Her role to provide the clean OCST team with a legitimate, auditor-flagged warrant for Freezer 11, and to be the one inside the TCRC broadcast booth to physically plug in the drive when the signal was bridged. The second piece was Mara. While the city prepared to celebrate, she was a ghost in the condemned shipyard, mapping Dryline Pier. She deployed a series of small, heat-sensitive cameras around the perimeter of the main warehouse. Her screen lit up. The primary warehouse was cold, as expected, but her thermal imaging cut through the insulation, revealing a second, distinct signature. "It is a box inside a box," she reported back, her voice a whisper over the comms. "A modular cold storage unit hidden inside the main freezer. The temperature signature is different, warmer, not for fish. It is for the living." It was the holding pen, the place they kept the human cargo, and likely the hard copies of their blackmail. The third piece fell to Talia. She secured a food truck permit for the parade. She designed a specialty dish, salted ribbon fish skewers with lemon dill glaze. It was the perfect cover. The truck would be her and Jude's mobile studio, while Jude worked in the back, surrounded by the hiss of fry oil and the hum of high-gain antennas. Talia would be out front. She modified her largest chafing dish, the kind used for catering. She welded a false bottom into the stainless steel hot tray. Hidden beneath a bed of sizzling fish, insulated from the heat, was a military-grade mesh router. This router would be the bridge, capturing the local news feed and allowing Jude to piggyback their video file directly into the TCRC's internal broadcast system, which Sable Wren would be waiting for. While his team built the trap, Lorenzo met the bear. He requested a meeting with Director Lyle Holland at a neutral site, a private dining room at a steakhouse. Holland arrived flanked by 2 OCST agents, his posture radiating confidence. "Vitali," Holland said, "not offering a hand. This is a surprise. I hear you had a rough night." The azure tidelight was a mess, Lorenzo said, his voice calm, deferential. "Your tactical team was enthusiastic, but they missed the real players." Holland leaned back. "Is that so?" "The Harbor Light Trust," Lorenzo said, placing the name on the table. "They are the ones running the Freezer 11 line. They set us both up. They used my network as a cover, and they used your raid as a distraction." He pushed a file across the table. It was fake. A manufactured ledger showing funds moving from Harbor Light to an offshore account. "They are cleaning house. Lyle, they are going to pin the whole operation on you." The video of the bribe Lorenzo gave a sympathetic shrug. "They are planning to leak it during the Fisherman's Parade while you are on stage. A public execution." Holland's face went pale, then hardened. He saw the logic. "I want the man who wears the pin," Lorenzo said. "I want Harbor Light. You want to survive. I have a deal, a mutual destruction pact. We both go public, but we aim our guns at the mayor, at the trust. We control the narrative." Holland stared at the file. He saw an escape route. "And how do we do that?" "You go on that stage tomorrow," Lorenzo said. "You give your speech. But when they leak their video, I leak mine. The real ledgers. The ones implicating the mayor. It will be chaos. In the confusion, we both walk away clean, and Harbor Light burns." Holland nodded slowly, arrogance replacing his fear. He would not be a scapegoat. He would be the whistleblower. He took the bait. Tomorrow, then, at the parade. The final move was a tactical feint. On the morning of the parade, Orion leaked a credible, anonymous tip to the Black Span mercenaries. The tip claimed that Lorenzo Vitali, weakened and betrayed, was planning to flee the city on a container ship leaving from a secondary cargo depot, 5 miles north of Dryline Pier. Just as Mara's thermal cameras showed, Black Span took the bait. They pulled 60% of their guards from Freezer 11, sending them on a wild goose chase to the north. The cold room within a cold room was left with a skeleton crew, just as Sable Wren's clean OCST team was given the green light. All the pieces were on the board. Jude sat in the hot, cramped food truck, the smell of frying fish thick in the air. His laptop was synced. Talia stood at the front window, her mesh router warming beneath the ribbon fish, her eyes locked on the TCRC plaza. Lorenzo and Mara moved through the crowd, invisible. The clock was ticking. "Sable is in the booth," Orion's voice came over their earpieces. "Holland is taking the stage. The feed is live. Talia, your router is active." "Jude." "I have the signal," Jude said, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "You have 90 seconds, Orion said. From the moment Jude hits enter, the network is breached. They will detect the anomaly in 90 seconds. The video has to be live. Holland has to be trapped, and Mara's team has to be inside Freezer 11 before that window closes. If we miss, they shut it all down, and we are exposed." Talia watched Holland approach the podium, a smug, confident smile on his face. The countdown began. The parade was a river of noise and color. Paper lanterns, shaped like giant squid in marlin, floated above the crowd. Confetti cannons boomed, spraying silver streamers that caught on the damp air. The traditional tossing of the sea lanterns had begun, small lights drifting down the main canal. Talia and Lorenzo moved through the throng, not as predators, but as partners. They were a single, focused unit, anticipating each other's movements, parting the crowd without shoving, their shoulders brushing. He was a shadow in a dark coat. She was a ghost in her vendor's apron. They moved like dancers who had practiced this choreography for a lifetime, their shared gaze fixed on the TCRC plaza. High on the floodlit stage, director Lyle Holland stepped to the podium. His smile was wide, projecting confidence. He was the city's protector, the man who had driven Lorenzo Vitali into the shadows, the man who was now, he believed, about to deliver the final blow to a corrupt mayor. He tapped the microphone. "My friends, my fellow citizens of Port Armitage?" In the food truck, Jude spoke, his voice tense. "Router is locked. Sable is in. I am patching." He hit the key. On the massive LED screens flanking the stage, Holland's face froze for a half second. The image stuttered. A tiny digital slip that no one but the plotters would notice. Talia's hot tray had done its job. The bridge was built. "Signal is dirty," Jude whispered. "Sable has the feed. It is on her. Now." On a rooftop 2 blocks away, a glint of light, a Black Span sniper, left behind as a contingency, had spotted the food truck's non-standard antenna. He settled the crosshairs on the truck's driver's side window. Before he could adjust for windage, a sound, like a pebble hitting a tin wall, snapped past his ear. He flinched. Mara Leto, prone on the adjacent rooftop, had missed on purpose. Her second shot did not miss. The sniper crumpled without a sound. In the crowd, Lorenzo saw the glint just as it vanished. He stopped. His head snapped toward the food truck, his body tensing to intercept a threat that was already gone. He looked at Talia, a silent, urgent question in his eyes. "Your brother." Talia, who had seen nothing, trusted his instincts. She nodded just once. A faint, terrified inclination of her head. It was permission. Go. Protect him. Lorenzo did not run. He melted into the crowd, moving with deadly speed toward the truck, leaving her to face the stage alone. On the podium, Holland was mid-sentence. A new era of transparency and integrity for our great port. Then the screens changed. Holland's smug face vanished, replaced by a grainy, high-angle video. Silence. the man with the coral pin, the envelope, and Director Lyle Holland, his own trusted face, taking the bribe. A collective, sucking gasp rose from the thousands of people in the plaza. On the screen, the video was joined by a split-screen image, a high-resolution scan of the Freezer 11 container manifest, the one from Talia's hard drive, now bearing an official TCRC audit stamp. The crowd's gasp turned to a low, angry murmur. Holland stared, his face white with shock. This was not the plan. This was not the mayor. This was him. "This is a lie," he roared into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. "A fabrication, Vitali. It is a deep fake by Lorenzo Vitali's organization. Seize that food truck. They are broadcasting from there." But it was too late. A new figure was walking onto the stage, not from the wings, but from the TCRC building entrance behind Holland. It was Sable Wren. She was pale but resolute, and she carried a stack of bound ledgers. She stepped up to the second podium, her voice ringing out, clear and amplified. "It is not a fake. Director Holland, I am Senior Auditor, Sable Wren of the TCRC. The video is real. And this," she held up a ledger, "is the corresponding audit trail and the signed fund transfers you personally authorized to the Harbor Light Trust." The plaza exploded. The truth, delivered at the perfect moment, detonated with the force of a bomb. Simultaneously, at Dryline Pier, the clean OCST team, acting on Sable's warrant, used a thermal lance to breach the cold room within a cold room. They found it a dark, frigid container holding 6 emaciated people and 3 racks of computer servers. The Blackspan mercs guarding the facility got the call. "Burn it, burn the manifest room." They ignited the thermite charges. But the OCST team was already inside, shielding the victims, securing the data. Back at the plaza, Lorenzo reached the food truck just as Jude was killing the signal. He saw Mara on the roof opposite, giving him a quick all-clear sign. He turned back to the plaza, scanning for Talia. He was intercepted. A man stepped out from behind a statue, blocking his path. The man with the fake coral pin, he was smiling, his eyes cold and amused. "You should have stayed retired. Vitali," said Casselviri, the chief accountant for the Harbor Light Trust. "You just destroyed the most profitable partnership this city has ever seen." Lorenzo looked at the man who had haunted his organization. "You set the fire. You just got caught in it." On the stage, Holland was finished. He saw Sable, the ledgers, the security guards moving toward him. He saw his life ending. Panicked, he did the only thing he could. He ran. He vaulted off the side of the stage, plunging into the screaming crowd, shoving people aside. He saw Talia, standing alone by her food truck, watching the chaos. He recognized her, the chef from the hotel. He lunged, grabbing her arm in a steel grip. "You are with them," he screamed at the top of his lungs, dragging her with him. "She is one of them. She is a terrorist." He was not taking a hostage. He was grabbing a media shield, a piece of cover. He dragged her away from the plaza, toward the service alleys. He shoved through a canvas flap, pulling her into the sudden, hot, humid quiet of a massive catering tent, a mobile kitchen. He had made his final, fatal mistake. He shoved her against a rack of cooling trays. "You are going to get me out of here," he hissed, his eyes wild. Talia looked at him. The panic, the noise, the fear of the plaza, it all fell away. The air smelled of hot oil, steam, and sanitation fluid. Holland was an intruder. This was her domain. He lunged at her again. She did not retreat. She grabbed the heavy, domed lid of a stock pot and met his lunge, the steel edge jamming hard into his collarbone. He roared in pain. As he recoiled, she snatched a damp, folded bar towel from the prep counter. She snapped it, a sharp, cracking sound, the scalding hot, wet fabric catching him across the eyes. Holland screamed, clutching his face, temporarily blind. Talia stepped in. She grabbed the large box of coarse sea salt used for the fryers. She threw a handful directly into his screaming, blinded face. He choked, inhaling the salt, collapsing against a prep table. Talia moved with a cold, brutal efficiency. She did not hit him. She hooked his arm, used his own weight against him, and applied a sharp, twisting pressure to his wrist and elbow. It was a lock she had used 1,000 times to break down whole carcasses. He went down, his knees hitting the rubber mats, neutralized without a single fatal blow. The tent flap flew open. Sable Wren ran in. Flanked by 2 armed plaza guards, they stopped, taking in the scene the most powerful lawman in the city, on his knees, weeping in pain, and the chef from the food truck, standing over him, breathing hard, her hands covered in salt. Sable stepped forward, her face grim. She kicked Holland's ankle, forcing him onto his stomach, and snapped the handcuffs on his wrists. "It is over, Director," she said. Talia looked at her own hands, then pushed the tent flap open, her eyes searching the screaming, chaotic plaza for a single, gray-eyed man. The party was over. Night fell over Port Armitage like a bolt of black cloth, muffling the chaos of the parade. The confetti clogging the gutters was now a sodden, gray pulp. The only remaining lights were the rhythmic, frantic pulses of red and blue, sweeping across the wet facades of buildings. The only sound, the distant wail of ambulance and police sirens. Talia left the plaza, leaving Holland in Sable Wren's custody. She left Jude with Mara, a silent order to keep him safe. She knew, with an instinct that defied logic, where Lorenzo would be. She found him at Dryline Pier. The place was a federal crime scene now, bathed in the harsh white light of investigation units. The Black Span mercenaries were gone, replaced by Sable's clean OCST team. The fire in the manifest room was out, leaving a charred, acrid smell that hung in the mist. Lorenzo was standing alone, just inside the ruined warehouse. He was staring at the gaping, lightless maw of the cold room within a cold room. The modular container was open. The victims had been rescued, the servers seized. All that remained was the chilling, metallic echo of the place itself. It was a tomb, and it was the source of his entire life. Talia stopped a few feet away, her hands shoved deep in her apron pockets. The salt she had used on Holland was still gritty under her fingernails. "They found hard copies," Lorenzo said, his voice hollow. He did not look at her. He just stared into the darkness. Ledgers, logs, dating back 15 years. They found Alara's name on a transfer manifest. He had found his sister, a name in a book, in the dark. "I built the Velvet Current to find this place," he continued, his voice rough with a confession he had never spoken. "I wanted to stop the hands that moved in the dark. I wanted to control the port so no one else could be swallowed by it." He turned to face her, his eyes shadowed, his face carved with a grief that was decades old. "And then I became them." It stopped being about her and started being about the power, about control. The organization became its own monster. It became a trap, the very thing I swore to destroy. Talia stepped toward him, into his space, into the cold air rolling out of the freezer. "My mother," she said, her voice quiet but strong. She did not just disappear. She tried to report what she found, that ledger I showed you. It was her copy. She was a whistleblower, not a victim who fell. She held up her phone, a text from Sable. It was a photo of a page recovered from the server room, a handwritten log, the data they found on the servers tonight, the hard copies. It is her handwriting. She was the one logging the shipments for Freezer 11 before they silenced her. Her mother's ghost was in the machine. His sister's name was on the list. They were two halves of the same, brutal story. He looked at her, truly seeing the shared wound that had drawn them together from the first moment in the hotel kitchen. Talia did not offer platitudes. She did not offer comfort. She offered solidarity. She stepped forward and leaned her shoulder against his, a simple, bracing contact. He did not pull her in. He just leaned back, accepting the support. Then he turned, and she turned. They stood facing each other in the harsh investigative lights. He reached out and cupped her face, his bandaged hand rough against her skin. She leaned her forehead against his. It was not an embrace of passion. It was the lashing of two ships together in a hurricane, finding a shared anchor. They stood that way for a long time, just breathing, shoulder to shoulder, forehead to forehead. A silent apology for the years they had both lost to this peer. "I am going to end it," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin, all of it, the current, the shadows. "I know," she whispered back. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the peer. It was slow, it was warm, it was a conscious choice. It was the taste of salt and grief and a promise. His lips were sure, asking a question she was already answering. She laced her fingers with his, their palms pressing together. They held the kiss, a deep, steady connection, a vow to walk out of this darkness together. When they broke apart, they did not let go of each other's hands. They just stood, breathing in sync, until their hearts finally slowed to a steady, matching rhythm. "Tomorrow," Lorenzo said, his voice firm, the decision made. "At the hearing, I will go public. I will admit my part in the city's corruption. I will hand over the keys to the velvet current, every asset, every rote." "Not alone," Talia said, gripping his hand. "I will be there. I will release my mother's ledgers. We publish everything. We share the consequences." Their moment of resolution was broken by the buzz of Lorenzo's phone. He answered, his eyes never leaving Talia's. It was Orion. "The accountant," Lorenzo said, listening, Vire. He put the call on speaker. Casel Vera was not at the plaza. Orion's voice was tight. "He was not at Dryline. He is in the wind. Lorenzo. He holds the keys." Talia looked at him. "Keys?" "The cold wallets," Lorenzo said, his face hardening. "The real money. Not the bribes, the decades of laundered assets that fund the entire shadow network. He can rebuild the entire organization in a week, even with Holland gone." Before they could process this, Talia's phone rang. It was Sable. "They are not waiting," Sable said, her voice exhausted but sharp. "The mayor is spinning. He's calling Holland a rogue agent, blaming Vitali for everything. He just announced an emergency TCRC hearing. It is not next week. It is tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Port Armitage is at a tipping point, and you two are at the center of it." Talia disconnected the call. Casel Vire was loose with the money. The mayor was controlling the narrative, and they had less than 12 hours. Talia looked past Lorenzo to the bridge high above the pier. She could just make out Mara's car, and she knew Jude was safe inside, watching over the city. She thought of her mother. She thought of Alara Vitali. She thought of the victims pulled from the cold room tonight. She squeezed Lorenzo's hand. Then he does not get a week. She would not let another soul be swallowed by Freezer 11. The TCRC special hearing was a circus of flashbulbs and shouted questions. The chamber was packed, the air suffocating with the smell of wet wool and anxiety. Port Armitage was holding its breath. Lyle Holland was led in, his wrists cuffed, his face a gray, collapsed mask. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow shock of a man who had lost the world. Sable Wren, composed and clinical, took the stand. She methodically presented the chain of evidence, the digital ledgers from Freezer 11, the hard copy manifests recovered from the fire, the direct fund transfers authorized by Holland to the Harbor Light Trust. But the narrative was already under attack. In the back of the room, phones began to buzz. A coordinated disinformation campaign. Casel Vira's last desperate move was flooding social media. Vitali stages coup. The headline screamed, TCRC auditor paid off by mob. The crowd in the gallery began to mutter, then to shout. Microphones were shoved toward the stand. Is this a mafia takeover? Lorenzo Vitali rose from his seat in the front row. The room fell into a sudden, stunned silence. He walked past the defense table, past Sable, and stood at the center of the podium. He looked at the cameras, his face calm. He did not speak. Instead, he unfastened the buttons on his suit jacket and shrugged it off, draping it over the chair. He methodically unfastened the cufflink on his right sleeve and began to roll the fine cotton fabric up his forearm. The room watched, confused. He revealed a pale, puckered scar that encircled his wrist like a frozen manacle. When I was 15, Lorenzo's voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. I was locked in a freezer for 2 days by a crew my father was supposed to be paying. This, he touched the scar, is what the cold does. I swore that day I would hunt the men who use the dark and the cold to move their product. I built an organization to hunt monsters. He paused, his silver-gray eyes finding Talia's in the crowd. But I have been holding on to that monster long enough. I became the very thing I hated. Today, I cut the power that feeds it. He stepped to the projector, placing a thick stack of legal documents under the light. Effective immediately, the velvet current is dissolved. He took a pen and signed the first page, his signature slashing across the paper. All assets, liquid and physical, are hereby transferred to a new, independently monitored public trust, the Armitage Maritime Commons. He looked at Sable. And I am pledging my full, unconditional cooperation with the federal investigation. The room was silent, the city paralyzed. Talia stood up. He's not the only one. She walked to the podium, placing her mother's worn ledger beside Lorenzo's documents. I am Talia Mercer, and this is my mother's logbook. She pointed to the screen, where Sable had Holland's data displayed. The data recovered from Freezer 11 matches my mother's logs, page by page. She was tracking the Harbor Light Trust 10 years ago. She was the one who tried to warn the port. And this, she tapped the screen, highlighting a name, is the signature that authorized every falsified invoice, both on her ledger and on the server. The man who tried to silence her, Casselvir. The name acted like a trigger. In the chaos, as security moved to lock down the room, Orion's voice crackled in Lorenzo's earpiece. He's running. Back of the building. He's in the utility tunnels. Mara and Orion were already in pursuit. Lorenzo grabbed Talia's hand. This way. They bypassed the elevators, plunging into a concrete service corridor. Talia stopped, sniffing the air. The ventilation, it is blowing cold. She ran to a wall schematic. It is the old coolant lines. It smells of ammonia. She pointed. He's not going to the garage. He's going to the water, the old canal exit. They burst through a set of rusted doors, emerging onto the dark, slick stone of the canal bank. Casselvir was there, cornered between the building and the black water. He was not alone. Stay back! Vitali, Vera screamed. He had his arm clamped around Jude's throat, a pistol pressed to his temple. Let him go, Cassel, Talia said, her voice shaking but firm, stepping forward. It is over. It is not over until the money says it is, he yelled, dragging Jude closer to the edge. You are the one, the chef, your mother. She was a problem, too. I told her to stop logging. I told her to walk away. He was monologuing, panicked. Talia kept walking, her hands raised. She did not walk away. Castle, she knew you were a threat. She was distracting him, closing the distance. Her eyes locked on his. Lorenzo had his weapon raised, slowly, deliberately. He lowered it. He placed it on the ground and kicked it away. You see, Lorenzo said, his voice calm. No weapons. Just let the boy go. It is me you want. He took one, slow, measured step forward. Cassel's eyes darted from Talia to Lorenzo and back to Jude. It was the moment. Jude, seeing Lorenzo's move and trusting his sister, suddenly drove his head backwards, smashing his skull into Vira's nose. In the same split-second intake of breath, Talia threw the heavy metal spice tin she had grabbed from her apron pocket. It struck Vira's gun hand, a sharp crack of metal on bone. The pistol clattered onto the stones. Lorenzo lunged, not for Veer, but for Jude, pulling him clear. Mara Leto, emerging from the tunnel exit behind them, drove her shoulder into Vira's side, tackling him. He toppled, and a small, black object flew from his jacket pocket, skittering across the wet stone and landing in a pile of discarded crab nets. The cold wallet, the key. The knots were finally untied. Holland and Veer were arrested. The OCST was subjected to a full federal cleansing. The TCRC was dissolved, and the new Armitage Maritime Commons, with Sable Wren on its board, took civilian oversight of the port. Weeks later, Salt and Sable was loud, bright, and packed with customers. The air was thick with steam and the smell of roasted garlic. Talia stood at the pass, inspecting a plate. On the wall behind the bar, where a liquor license might hang, was a small, framed object the single branch of a real coral pin, snapped cleanly in two, a symbol of a new chapter. The back door opened, letting in a gust of cold night air. Lorenzo walked in. He wore jeans and a dark sweater. No coat, no guards. His hands were bare. The kitchen staff did not look up, accustomed to his presence. He walked through the fire and chaos of the dinner rush and came to stand behind Talia. He did not speak. He just slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood there for a long moment, a still point in the frantic, roaring heat. "Can I learn?" he whispered, his voice a low rumble against her ear. How to stand in a kitchen with this much high heat? Talia smiled, leaning her head back against his. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest flat on his chest, directly over his heart. She pulled his face down to hers and kissed him, slow and deep and sure, a promise kept, a future chosen. The curtain closed on the quiet, steady rhythm of their breathing, two hearts beating as one in the kitchen where it all began. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.